Good afternoon and welcome to this Planning Committee meeting being held on Wednesday, the 11th of March 2026. This is a multi-locational meeting which is being held in the Council Chamber at Penalta House and via Microsoft Teams. This meeting is being live streamed and a recording will be made available to view via the Council's website, except for discussions involving confidential or exempt items. Therefore, the images and audio of those individuals present and or speaking at Planning Committee will be publicly available to all via the recording on the Council's website. Please can I remind all members joining remotely to leave their cameras on during the meeting and to use the hands up function on Teams when you wish to speak. For those members joining in the chamber, please also use the hands up function on Teams and turn on the chamber microphone when you wish to speak. Votes for this meeting will be taken via Microsoft Forms. When a vote is required, the form will appear on your screen and then members will be asked to click on yes, no or abstain and then click on submit vote. Please can I remind members that if you lose connection during the meeting, please make every effort to reconnect. However, the meeting will continue as long as it remains quorate. And we are quorate?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So agenda item 1 is to receive apologies for absence. Apologies have been received from Councillor Julian Simmons and Councillor Greg Eade. If members are aware of any other apologies, please can you add them to the meeting chat or notify committee services. And now agenda item 2 is declarations of interest. Councillors and officers are reminded of their personal responsibility to declare any personal and or prejudicial interest in respect of any items of business on this agenda in accordance with the Local Government Act 2000, the Council's Constitution and the Code of Conduct for both councillors and officers. Are there any declarations? None indicated? Okay, thank you. Then we'll move on to agenda item 3, which is minutes of the Planning Committee meeting held on the 11th of February 2026. That's pages 1 to 15 of the pack. I'll just go through them one page at a time for accuracy, and then I would request that members move and second the minutes. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, page 12, page 13, page 14, and page 15. So there are no concerns about the minutes. Could somebody move then the minutes? Move, thank you, Councillor Angel. Anybody second?
Second.
Thank you, Councillor Aldworth. So they've been moved and seconded. Could we have the voting slip then, please? Once the voting slip is there, could you vote for, against, or abstain and click on the submit button?
The minutes are approved, Chair.
Okay. Thank you, Vicky. We now then move on to agenda item 4, which is application number 25/0578 RET. It's Unit E, St David's Industrial Estate, Pengham, Blackwood, and the case officer is Carwyn Powell, and I've got Joshua Burrows. But Carwyn, you're presenting this one, aren't you?
That's correct, Chair, yes. Yeah. If you just bear with me while I share the presentation. And I will warn you, my machine goes really slow when I'm on Teams, so it might take some time to open it, unfortunately. Right, that's the wrong one. Right, okay. Okay. So this is an application for Unit E, St David's Industrial Estate, Pengham. So we have the application site shown in red on the location plan here in the top right-hand corner. You will notice the irregular shape of parcel of land there. And then you've got the aerial photograph in the bottom left-hand corner. I'll point out, although the shading makes it slightly difficult to see, but I'll point out to members the relationship of the existing units on site, which are not part of this application, the parcel of land to the south of those, which is where the proposed units are erected. Then you have this belt of trees to the south of that, and then further to the south of that is Woodland Place. And that's relevant for members given the objections that'll be discussed today. Okay. So this is a photograph of the front of the units, looking from within the estate towards the south. As you can see, they are box profile sheeting clad units with a metal frame. That's looking back towards the existing units on the right hand side. And this is the site layout plan, with the plan on the left showing the existing site layout or the previous site layout, and the plan on the right showing the as-built units on site there. The plan also shows the car parking within the site, and also shows a swept path analysis to show that vehicles of a certain size can maneuver within the site. These are the elevations of the buildings, and that's the floor layout. Okay, so as I say, this is an application for industrial units on an existing industrial estate within the Pengun ward. It's on land that's allocated for industrial use for B1, B2 and B8 uses, albeit there are residential units uses relatively close in the region of 30 to 40 metres away. So the application is a retention application for units already erected. Therefore, we have objections from residents in terms of the use of the existing buildings and the impacts on amenity that are felt by those. Those impacts are assessed within the report, and subject to the conditions suggested in the report, the impacts are considered to be acceptable and can be controlled acceptably from a planning perspective. The units are acceptable from a design perspective, having regard for the context of the site. The land use is acceptable because it's on an existing industrial estate. There are no highway safety impacts, and therefore the application is recommended for approval in accordance with those conditions.
Thank you, Carwyn. We have two speakers. First of all, we have Mr. Mark Oliver. Mr. Oliver, are you there? Yes, I can't see you.
Yes, I'm here.
You're there, okay. Mr. Oliver, you're allowed 5 minutes to make a presentation. You can start whenever you wish, okay?
Okay, understood. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Mark Oliver, and I've been living at number 1 Woodland Place for over 38 years. I'm speaking on behalf of all the residents of Woodland Place, and we think it's important that you get a sense of perspective of what it's been like living next to this development for the last 3 years. Despite it saying that the units haven't been occupied, they've been occupied since they've been constructed. So we've been complaining about this development to the council since work started in 2023. And despite no planning consent being granted until submission now, the work has been allowed to progress to completion. My view is it could have been stopped a long time ago. We've had 3 years' experience of how this site operates, and to be honest, it's been absolutely horrendous and a nightmare. The new unit have brought the various work activities around 20 metres closer to our home because they've extended the yard as well. And as a result, we've had constant issues with loud noise and fires. This happens 7 days a week, weekends and late evenings. The noise can be clearly heard from inside our properties, but it's also 10 times worse when you're trying to spend some time in the garden with your grandchildren or trying to have a family occasion or anything like that. It's just really unpleasant having to put up with that noise all the time. We've also had constant issues with fires, as I mentioned, burning during the day and evening, bellowing dense smoke down over our gardens and into our houses. The smells are of burning plastics, and they smell very toxic, and they are extremely unpleasant. I've actually been at the site and asked the occupiers of the units to stop lighting fires, and they've denied lighting a fire, even though there was one burning in an oil drum on site. So, you know, it's the behaviours on site are not really good. Some of the noise issues that we experience is racing vehicles around site late at night, industrial machinery running for several hours, excessive revving of car and van engines, the constant banging of metal objects, people shouting obscenities across the site, loud music. I could go on and on with a list. The planning application states that the residents of Woodland Place are not impacted by this, but this is definitely not the case. I'm trying to take the emotion out of it, but living next door to it or adjacent to it, as the people to the south of the development are, we feel that we've been largely ignored to date, but there are some things that we'd like you to consider as a group of councillors and the chair. Item 1, consider removing the B2 use classification for these units. The activities carried out on this site create excessive noise, and they are not suitable to be near domestic properties. Item number 2, the strict application of working hours. Based on our experience to date, the activities carried out on site create excessive noise and are not suitable. Sorry, I've done that one. Based on our experience to date, we have no confidence that this will happen. Sort of restricting them to work until 5 or 6 o'clock at night and until 12 on a Saturday, nothing on weekends and bank holidays, because it's been working 24/7 for a good few years. So a condition needs to be included to clarify who's responsible for applying these working hours, and if they are not controlled appropriately, what are the repercussions? And I think something needs to go in the application to reflect that. Item number 3. I think Carwyn mentioned on the way through the mature trees that the woodland between our houses and the site. Many mature trees were removed to facilitate the development. So I think a condition should be placed, or we think the condition should be placed on the owner to replace them around the site perimeter. And item number 4, the site is an eyesore inside and outside the perimeter. The lane and the pathway lead to the local primary school where children and their parents walk on a daily basis. We've had oil leaks, we've had all sorts of things coming down there. A temporary fence has been there for 3 years, and rubble from the development is still visible almost 3 years later. So that needs to be tidied up and restored. So in summary, we're all annoyed and frustrated with this development and the constant noise and nuisance that it's causing. And we've had no consultation, and the residents concerned has not been considered. And we ask that you include some conditions to this application to restrict the type of work activities that are carried out on site to protect the residents from the constant noise and nuisance we've been encountering for the last 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Oliver. The second speaker we have as in objection to this application is Councillor Rena Charkan-Dawson. You have the same amount of time. Rena, you can start whenever you wish. Okay.
Chair, members of the committee, I wish to object to this application for the following material planning reasons. Number 1, harm to residential amenity, policy CW2. Although the site lies within an industrial estate, the officer report confirms that the residential properties of Woodland Place are only 36 metres from the building, separated by a thin belt of trees. The planning history shows this is significantly intensified structure compared with the original small building it replaced. Residents have raised sustained concerns regarding noise, fires, nuisance, uncontrolled activity on the site. The report dismisses these outside of planning control, yet these impacts are exactly why policy CW2 exists, to prevent unacceptable harm to neighbouring amenity. Key concerns include no acoustic assessment has been undertaken to demonstrate the impact of the nearest homes. Intensification of B2, B8 increases risks of noise, heavy goods vehicles, movement and night-time disturbances. The narrow tree belt is insufficient as a buffer between heavy industrial activity and housing. Given the existing complaints and the lack of mitigation strategy, the application fails to demonstrate compliance with CW2. Number 2, loss of the buffer zone and green infrastructure. Residents state that the extension encroaches into the original buffer zone that separated the industrial estate from the residential area. The officer report dismisses this without providing any mapped comparison or evidence. Furthermore, concerns about buried waste and ground disturbances have been dismissed as not material, yet under PPW Edition 12, 2024, the strengthened requirements of green infrastructure and biodiversity, any loss of green buffer or alterations to land stability is material and must be properly assessed. This has not occurred. The development therefore fails to satisfy Chapter 6 of PPW and SP6 placemaking requirements for the environmental protection and green infrastructure safeguarding. Item 3. Inadequate drainage information, flood risk concerns, CW5. Residents objected strongly to no installation of drainage or interceptors, increased surface runoff and localised flooding. The SAB has not approved any drainage scheme yet, and because the building is already constructed, there's a risk that compliant drainage solutions cannot be retrofitted on the constructed site. This creates a real concern that approving retention now will lock in a substandard drainage arrangements contrary to policy SW5 and Schedule 3 of the Flood and Water Management Act 2010. Number 4, highway safety implications, SW3. Although the officer reports state 18 parking spaces are provided, the intensification of use in 4 separate industrial units will generate more vehicle movements, more delivery traffic, increased HGV activity. This is a significant change from the previous single unit. The development has not been supported by a transport statement, which would normally be expected for a subdivision of an industrial unit so close to residential streets. Therefore, the application fails to demonstrate no adverse impact on highway safety, SW3. Inaccuracies and procedural concerns. Multiple residents have raised concerns that the extension is much larger than declared, claim closer to 500 square metres. The ownership certificates are disputed. Residents state no genuine consultation occurred despite the statutory notice. Errors or omissions in the application form are legitimate planning concerns where they cast doubt on the accuracy of plans and impacts. Committee should not endorse a retrospective approval where the factual basis has been questioned and not adequately resolved. Point 6. Retrospective nature and unauthorised intensification. This development has been built without permission.
You have half a minute now, Councillor. Okay.
Sorry.
You have half a minute left.
Now operating in part, the subject of numerous nuisance complaints, granting permission retrospectively without securing proper assessment, noise, traffic, drainage, biodiversity, risks rewarding unauthorised development contrary to the public interest, undermining community confidence in the planning system. Conclusion. This application fails to comply with key LDP policies including SW2 amenity, SW3 highways, SW5 water environment, SP6 placemaking. It represents an uncontrolled...
You now exceeded your time, Councillor. Are you winding up there?
Yeah.
Or have you, how much have you got left?
Oh, 2 sentences. Intensification of industrial activity too close to homes with unresolved issues of noise, drainage, buffer loss and public nuisance. I therefore urge members to refuse the application.
Okay, thank you. Right, officers, would you like to respond initially to the speakers and their objections?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I will reshare the presentation for a second. Give me a moment. And if I go back to the site layout plan in terms of what's happened there? Sorry, my machine's gone blank. Yeah, sorry, my machine's gone blank, so Anthony's got to share it off his machine, and I'll talk to it then. Okay, so if you go down to the site. Go down again. Okay. So if you look at the site location plan there, the application building is clearly shown in dark grey on the plan on the right hand side. The black line surrounding that site is the extent of the applicant's ownership and the extent of the industrial estate. That plan clearly shows the building that's been built on site and clearly shows it's within the application site. In terms of any works outside of that area and in the wooded area, so that's the erection of a fence, the removal of trees, that is all on council-owned land. Now, that matter is being investigated by our Property Services Division. They've been there and surveyed the site. They are satisfied that the building itself does not encroach on council land and therefore does not encroach outside of the industrial estate. However, they are of the opinion that the fence that's been erected is on their land. That fence doesn't form part of this application, and therefore neither does the removal of any trees which are outside of the application site. So whilst Chapter 6 would be applicable if it were within the application site, it's not in this particular instance because those works don't form part of this application and are not within the application site. In terms of the concerns raised by the resident, suggesting that work should have been stopped, whilst there's provision within planning legislation to stop works which are unauthorised, the planning authority has to be mindful of the potential for compensation for the applicant if we stop works which are considered to be acceptable in the long run. So in this instance here, officers have recommended approval of this application. So if we had served a stop notice to stop the works being carried out, that could have been seen as being unreasonable behaviour on behalf of the local planning authority. So we have to have mind for that. And when we first became aware of this unauthorised development, we considered whether an application could make this development acceptable. We felt that it possibly could, and therefore to serve a stop notice wasn't considered to be expedient at that particular time, and that's why works weren't stopped. I appreciate that then raises concerns for residents that it's felt that appropriate action hasn't been taken, but not taking action was the appropriate course of action at that particular moment in time. Whilst the development is 20 metres closer to the houses, as can be seen from the site layout plan, it is still within the industrial estate, it's still on allocated land for industrial purposes, and that land could be used for activities outside of the building previously. So any outside noisy activities would have already been permissible on the site. By granting planning consent here, we are imposing conditions in terms of the hours of operation on site, which would reduce the impact on the amenity of neighbouring residents. So therefore, on balance, it's considered that the proposal is acceptable in terms of those impacts. I've mentioned the lack of enforcement and no confidence in the authority to enforce conditions. There is no need to put in a condition who is responsible for enforcing it because the local planning authority is responsible for those actions. As I've said, whilst we didn't take action to prevent any activities on site before, it was an unauthorised development. The only way of stopping that is a stop notice. Now that we have conditions, we can require the developer to comply with those conditions and indeed serve breach of condition notice if they fail to do so. So we now have introduced stronger controls on the operation of the site effectively. The absence of a SAB approval, that is commonplace with most developments. Whilst there's no SAB approval in place at the moment, the planning authority is not able to consider whether there's an absence of SAB. That's a totally separate process. That's a matter for the SAB authority to take enforcement action if they see fit. The reference to policy CW5 in the LDP, it does protect the water environment, but all we have to consider there is, can the site be drained, not how it's drained. So this site can be drained, whether that's through mains drainage, which is a last resort, or whether it's a SAB approval for green roofs, or whether it's rainwater butts, or whether it's attenuation ponds within the site. That is a matter for the SAB authority to resolve how the site is drained. But the local planning authority is satisfied that the site can be drained, even if that does mean a connection to the mains drainage. In terms of lack of parking and the absence of a transport statement, this is a relatively small development. The requirement to provide a transport statement wouldn't be supported by guidance or national policy. One is not considered to be required in this instance. The 18 parking spaces proposed on site are for the proposed units, or the units to be retained, and that's considered to be acceptable in terms of highway safety and meets the requirements set out in the SPG.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Powell. I've got you. I see Mr. Oliver, you have your hand up. You've had your opportunity to present your case. You cannot take any further part in the debate now. It's between members and officers to decide on this application. So I'm sorry, but I can't call you back in.
That's okay.
Okay, so
I was going to ask if I could ask a question. You just clarified I can't.
Okay. The next speaker I have, it's Lisa Cooper wants to come in first of all with some information. Lisa?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just to follow up from what Carwyn stated, we can only ask for transport assessments for any industrial development greater than 5,000 square metres, which is clear a lot smaller, and that's under TAN 18. So it would have been unreasonable for us to ask for a transport assessment in this instance in terms of trip generation. And as Carwyn also pointed out, there is scope to provide adequate parking. I think we put a condition on that it's got to be provided within 3 calendar months from the date of consent. Obviously, if it's not, then again, that would be an enforcement issue. But there's ample scope to do that.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. We've now got 2 members that wish to speak, two members that wish to speak, and Councillor Nigel Dix and Councillor Shane Williams, and then Kerry. Do you want to come back on one of these issues now? No, I'll wait my turn. Oh, you wait your turn. Okay. Then Councillor Nigel Dix first.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just for clarification, if I could, Carwyn. So this site was operating illegally without planning permission. It's now coming for planning permission, and you're telling us that if it's granted planning permission, it will then have conditions placed on it. Now, those conditions, I just listened to the residents, and they've had a pretty rough time there with noise, banging, fires, etc. going on there close to their properties. Would those conditions alleviate any of those concerns, and also the operating times as well? So would they still be allowed to have fires? Would they still be operating at all times of day and over the weekends? And would they still be making noises there with these new planning conditions that you wish to put on them?
Thank you, Councillor Dix. Carwyn?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Thanks, Councillor. The conditions on the consent restricts the hours of operation from, I think it's 8 till 6 Monday to Friday, 8 till 12 on a Saturday, and then no work at all on Sundays and bank holidays. So that severely restricts the hours of operation on site, which I understand have been 24/7 to some extent on the site at the moment. So it's a significant reduction in the hours of operation there. In terms of activities on site, I'm going to drop my colleague in it now, but things such as fires on site and so on and so forth, they are not covered under the planning legislation. We can't really control those, but they can be a statutory nuisance, and perhaps Kerry will want to come in on that matter in a minute. But those are matters which would be covered by public health colleagues under the statutory nuisance legislation.
Okay, thank you, Carwyn. And then Councillor Shane Williams, and then I'll ask you after that, Kerry, okay?
Thank you very much for that, Chair. And I appreciate all what you said, Carwyn. It's quite exhaustive and clear. It's just that on page 20, it says in the report there's no unacceptable impact on the amenity adjacent to adjacent properties or land. Now, listening to one of the residents, it seems to suggest that the extended size of this unit, not to mention all the fires and all the rest of it, is having that unacceptable impact. Now, I welcome, and I'm sure that the residents welcome, strict control of the hours of operation, and I noticed that's in the condition, and you've mentioned it. It's just that looking at the plan that you put up, that unit is much bigger than the original one. And I don't know whether that would have, although it's on the land of the applicant, we're not sure whether that size would have been granted had they come for planning in the first size, given the size and taking it closer to the residents. And I think that's a situation that the residents are unfortunately stuck with, given that size. So I think that the concern about the fence, I think that's, as you've mentioned, not really for us, but isn't that part of the same development, that fence, although it's not this planning application, do they go hand in hand with this development, or is that totally separate? And my other question about the SAB authority, is it, if this had gone through the normal process and that they were seeking planning approval, would that SAB approval be needed at that time? Because we're now seeming to say, well, it's not a matter for us, that's a matter for the SAB authority. I'm just wondering what the process would have been had they done it in a normal way.
Councillor, thank you, Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of the activities on site, yes, we've got a new building on site now, so that building is closer to the existing residential properties. However, noisy activities such as outside storage, or vehicles moving, vehicles reversing, all those sort of activities which are mentioned in the complaints from the residents, all were permissible on that parcel of land prior to this development being built. So that has to be borne in mind. Now, again, Kerry can come in on this matter, but if a noise survey had been conducted, the noise survey could have worked out that there were already noisy activities on that part of the site, and therefore the proposed activities are no different to that. Given the nature of the site and the size of the site, a noise survey wasn't considered to be necessary because we can control lots of activities there by the conditions imposed on the consent. So whilst I appreciate the concerns of residents, and clearly it is noisier now than it was previously from their experience, but that doesn't mean that it's noisier than what it could have been previously without the need for any additional planning consents as well. So we have to bear that in mind. And in that regard, on balance, we consider the impacts on residential amenity to be acceptable. And I use this phrase quite frequently, in planning terms. Now, the residents might not consider it to be acceptable, but in planning terms, it is considered to be acceptable. And as planners and as members of the planning committee, that's what we have to consider effectively. And then the second question, the SAB issue, if this was an application for a proposed unit, we'd have the same situation. We could have an application before us which fills up all of that land, could be perfectly acceptable from a planning perspective, yet we know that they can't get a SAB approval on there. Because SAB would require them to put attenuation ponds in, or it would require them to put surface drainage as opposed to connected to the mains. However, the SAB does allow them, if they cannot do all of that surface drainage and put in attenuation ponds and so on and so forth, to connect to the mains in the same way as they would have done 10, 15 years ago. But that's considered to be the last resort as a part of a SAB approval. So it's not to say that they can't get a SAB approval. It's not to say that they will then definitely have to connect into the mains drainage. They probably, in this instance, you will probably end up with something between the two. But that is not a matter for the planning authority to consider, really. So it doesn't matter whether it was an application for a retention application or an application for proposed development. We could be sitting in exactly the same position in either instance, really.
Okay, thank you, Carwyn. Kerry, would you like to come in now, please?
Thanks, Chair. I suppose I just want to reiterate what Karen has already said. As environmental health, we have our own legislation regarding any allegations of fires, whether that's under a duty of care to dispose of waste correctly. Burning of waste is not a permissible form of disposal. And as Karen alluded to, we've got our statutory nuisance legislation, which governs smoke and odour. So environmental health could and will pick up those allegations outside of this planning committee. We have had complaints about noise from the industrial estate, which our officers are investigating, but environmental health is satisfied with the conditions that we've recommended be imposed on this application, that would adequately control the situation. But again, if there were still matters arising with regards to noise within those hours, then we can investigate those under our statutory nuisance legislation.
Okay, thank you, Kerry. Councillor Mansell-Powell wants to come in with a question. Councillor Powell?
Yeah, a lot of the questions I got, Chair, are probably aimed at the speaker's concerns. The first one I've got for Carl, and he did touch on it briefly. The speaker mentioned it's 3 years since the construction work started. When did planning become aware of the work going ahead? It's for the environmental part, the fires and noise. How many complaints of environmental actually had up to this point? We seem to be looking past the application going through. I'm just wondering how many environmental complaints have there been and any actions that are taken up until this point. It doesn't really give the residents confidence where we're looking past the application. Do you want to do those two first, or?
Okay, Carwyn.
Unfortunately, as my computer's crashed, I'm unable to answer the question about when the enforcement case was first brought to our attention because I can't access any of our databases, unfortunately, at the moment. But I can certainly provide that information to the councillor at a later stage, but I haven't got that information at this moment in time. I think that Mr. Oliver suggested that he's been dealing with this matter for 3 years. I think the case is possibly a 2024 case that we've had from an enforcement perspective. But unfortunately, enforcement isn't a quick process. It's not something that is dealt with overnight. And sometimes it can be quite a long drawn out process. I mean, this is an application, this is a 25 application. So this application has been with us for in the region of 6 months, if not longer. And often these matters can take time to resolve when you require information from developers and information to satisfy our requirements in terms of impacts of amenity and so on and so forth. So yeah, appreciate that it's been with us for some time. I appreciate the residents have been dealing with this for some time, but what we have to consider is this proposal before us now acceptable in planning terms, and whether it's acceptable now and whether it was acceptable 3 years ago isn't really the point. Is it acceptable at this moment in time when we're considering this application today?
Okay, thank you, Carwyn. Kerry, you wanted to come back in on this as well?
Correct.
Thank you, Chair. I have not got the total number of complaints that we've received to hand, I'm afraid, but if you give me some time, I can probably pull that up. But I know we do have one active complaint open at the moment that's currently being investigated. They do have 24/7 access to our on-call environmental health officers. And I believe there was one call out to date on the 15th of February about noise from machinery on a Sunday. But unfortunately, our officer was dealing with another complaint. We only have one officer on out of hours. He was dealing with an alarm. So the officer was not able to visit on that occasion. But we have had diary sheet entries, and I think we've had some noise app recordings as well, which is an application on smartphones that we use to allow complainants to record the noise they're experiencing. But obviously that complaint on a Sunday would be dealt with through the conditions that have been recommended today.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you, Kerry. There's
Could I come back in there? Could I come back in there, please, Councillor Sir Alice? It doesn't inspire confidence. Sorry. It doesn't inspire confidence, when we've got enforcement cases on that seem to be dragging along, and then we're on the point then of agreeing to give something planning, and then we're just in this fiddle and meddle where we've got to try and enforce it through conditions. I just wondered, should it be deferred until we get an outcome for these investigations? That was one. And the other one that I was a bit concerned with was, I think Carwyn said it was no noise survey required on our car. I know acoustics was mentioned early on. That was the other one. This one's a little bit messy for me due to the nature of the complaints up until this point. And now we put in conditions in place to deal with those complaints.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Powell. Do you want to come back in again, Carwyn?
Yeah, sorry. In terms of the investigation complaint, this planning application is a resumption of that investigation complaint. So a resumption of an investigation complaint isn't necessarily taking enforcement action or stopping activities. It could well be receiving a planning application and then determining that application, because approval of this application would resolve the current breach, which is that there's an unauthorised use on the land. Now, if there's a subsequent breach of the conditions attached to that consent, that becomes a different breach, and we'd open a new case then as a different breach. And a breach of condition is a lot easier to deal with, in all honesty, because it's basically a straight prosecution to the courts. There's no right of appeal against a breach of condition notice. You can't put an application in to deal with that. So effectively, if we receive complaints that there's a breach of the hours of operation on site, we will investigate that. If it turned out to be correct, then we will consider whether it's expedient to pursue enforcement action. And as I said, that's a service of a notice and then straight to the courts. There's no rights of appeal to that. Whereas if we'd served an enforcement notice or a stop notice in terms of the unauthorised use of the land, there's a right of appeal for that. So we have to consider whether what we're doing is reasonable and whether that's the correct course of action. Now, if we'd served notice in this instance here to stop the use, and they'd appealed against that, bearing in mind that we had sat here today saying that this use, recommending to officers that this use is acceptable, our chances of winning an appeal on that basis are severely diminished. So we have to bear that in mind. Unfortunately, it does take time to go through the enforcement process. In this instance, I've just checked the figures now. It is May 2023 the enforcement case came to our attention. So yes, it is almost 3 years. Unfortunately, it can often take that time to resolve a matter like this, particularly when we're chasing an application and we're looking to get a resolution to that application and able to make a recommendation to officers whether we consider to be acceptable. In this instance, we followed that process to this point here today. We think that the application is acceptable, and that's why it's recommended for approval.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Before you come back in, if
Sorry, Councillor Sir Al, can I just come in with one last one?
Just 1 minute, Councillor Powell. Kerry Davis also wants to make some comments on this, so that may clarify any points that you might want to add. So, Kerry, could you come back in?
Thanks, Chair. I think it's been raised a couple of times about why wasn't there a noise report submitted on this application. Obviously, Environmental Health are consulted. If we thought that was necessary or appropriate, we would have asked for a noise report to be produced. But we're satisfied that the conditions that we've imposed in regard to those hours of operation are sufficient to control the risk. The noise report would have to take into account the character of the area. It is an industrial estate. It has planning use as an industrial estate. So that would be taken into account as part of that noise report. And the hours of operation that we've imposed are quite stringent, actually, but they are acceptable in terms of daytime hours. You know, we're not allowing the, obviously if the committee approves the conditions, our recommendations would be to not allow it to go on late into the evening, on the weekends, you know, on a Sunday, late into a Saturday afternoon. So we're satisfied that those controls are adequate and appropriate, and we didn't feel a noise assessment was required in this case. Also, the noise assessment would only look at what was currently at play. As you're aware, you know, businesses can move out of industrial estates, different businesses can move in. So it would only be very specific to what was going there or being proposed to be put there. It wouldn't take into account of every type of business that could possibly use those units. It's quite a general approach. So I don't know whether that answers your questions.
Okay, thank you, Kerry. Did you want to come back in now then, Councillor Powell?
Yeah. Yeah, only just one last one, Chair, sorry. Yeah. If this was refused, Carwyn, where does it go from a planning perspective next? Obviously, there's concerns with all leading up to, I know we'd say we can get rid of it with the conditions. If this was refused tonight, what would be next? Or where does it go?
Well, we wouldn't refuse tonight. Would we have to come back next month for reasons for refusal for members for consideration? But I don't know what the intentions of the applicant are, but in that this building's been built, I suspect it is to appeal. Bearing in mind that officers have already written a report which recommends approval subject to conditions, it may be difficult for us to come up with reasons for refusal which we feel we can defend at appeal. So that's where I would advise members really that it's within the gift of the applicant to make an appeal, and we've got to consider whether we can defend that appeal subsequently when it goes to PEDU, basically.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Councillor Shane Williams.
Just one quick question. Following up from what the resident said regarding the trees, as I understand it, the removal of the trees was not part of this extension of the building, that's outside that area, is it, Carwyn? But is it the same person or the same people involved in removing trees that we think is council land? Have I got that right?
I believe it is the same person,
Right.
but as I say, that the matter of trespass on council land, we've left that with the Property Services Division to investigate that, and therefore they will be able to confirm that effectively. They've sent a surveyor out, he surveyed the land, and he's satisfied that they are encroaching onto council land in terms of the erection of the fencing, and I believe all of the wooded area is within council ownership, in which case, if they've removed trees, they've removed council trees, really. So it would be for Property Services to decide with the developer whether they want replacement planting. If it was part of the planning application site, we would be looking for replacement planting, and the guidance says 3-1.
Yeah.
So we would be saying to this developer here, if you've removed 20 trees, we want 60 planted. I don't think you can achieve to get 60 plant trees on there, to be honest with you, but whether Property Services want him to do that or not, that's a matter for them to resolve.
It just doesn't give us much confidence that someone is taking trees away that is even outside this area that they are building on. That's a concern.
Yeah.
I know it's not a matter for us here tonight, but it is about goes to the confidence that we have in.
Yeah, I mean, just as an aside, not necessarily for this development here, but for an aside for members, is that new legislation which came out, I say new legislation, it's been out for about 18 months now, but it's guidance that came out from Welsh Government, is that if you remove trees on a development site, you have to replace them 3-1, and you have to consider the green infrastructure that was on there before you put the application in. Whereas previously to that, if you put an application in, it's at that point in time we consider, well, what green infrastructure was on there. That guidance came out, or that legislation came out and said, you could consider what was removed before. So if someone said, okay, I've got a field here with loads of trees on it, I'll cut the trees down to put housing on it, we would consider the loss of that trees now. We wouldn't have done before this policy came out. So in this instance, if it was required to facilitate this development, which because it's outside of the red line boundary, it's not, we would have required replacement planting, even though he did it before he built the buildings. Because it's outside the red line boundary, we can't really deal with it because it's not part of this proposal.
Okay, thank you, Carwyn.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
Thank you, Carwyn.
Right, I think we've given this application a full hearing now tonight. I don't think there are any more questions that need to be answered. And the officer's recommendations that permission be granted subject to the conditions contained in the officer's report. That's the recommendation that officers have put forward. Will somebody move that? You move it, Councillor Angel. Thank you. Is it been seconded? I see no indication from anybody that it's seconded. Then in which case, so that we have a decision tonight, I'll second that recommendation. And in that case, can we have a voting slip on it, please? So will you please vote for, against, or abstain, and then press the submit button.
The vote's been cast, Chair, and the officer's recommendation has been carried.
Okay, thank you, Vicky. Thank you. And so we now move on then to agenda item number 6. If you want to leave, I'm sorry, yes. Okay. 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 Agenda item 6, which is application number 25/0814, and it's a full application for Tredegar Junction Hotel, Commercial Street, Pontland Fife, Blackwood. The case officer again is Carwyn Powell. Carwyn, have you got any breath left? Are you ready to start this off?
Yeah, that's not a major problem, Chair. My PC is not going to work tonight, so I'm going to have to ask Anthony to share the presentation. And I'm going to go all Boris Trump and say, next slide, please, to him all the time. So bear with us, okay, whilst we try to get this to work, okay? Yeah, so this is an application at the Tredegar Junction Hotel on Commercial Street in Pontland Fife. Next slide, please. So there you can see the application site there. So if you look at the aerial photograph, the road on the left-hand side of the site is Commercial Street. And then to the right-hand side of the site is the rear lane to Sir Ivers Road, and you can see a car park then to the north of the site. The drawing on the top right-hand corner of that slide there, it's a topographical survey of the site, which isn't that clear to see, but that's basically given the red line boundary showing the site. You can just about see the existing Tredegar house on the top part of that drawing. Okay, next slide, please, Andy. So that's the Tredegar house there. As you can see, it's fire damaged in the photograph on the left-hand side. The proposal is to demolish that building. Then you've got a photograph which is looking down Commercial Street towards Portnaforth, towards the garage in the dip. Next slide, please. That's within the site on the left-hand side, looking down towards Sir Ivers Road. On the right-hand side, then, is a photograph looking up Commercial Street back towards the building. Next, please. Again, from within the site, at the lower level, looking up at the property again, parallel with Commercial Road then, and then looking from the rear lane, the car park, back towards the rear area of the site. That's from the back of the site at the rear lane to Sir Ivers Road, looking up at the building. As you can see, it's a large building, 3 stories at the rear, due to the split level of the site. The photograph on the right is the car park at the rear of Sir Ivers Road, and you'll notice the buildings on stilts along Commercial Street there. So next slide, please. So this is the application proposal. You can see the property at the top of the site there. It's a split level development with a green roof on it. It's a development of 36 apartments within a block, which is 5 stories high, front and rear. But given the split level nature of it, you'll notice that you'll be able to see more levels than that. Then you've got a car park to the rear of the site, which would be accessed off the rear lane to Sir Ivers Road. Next slide, please. So that's the elevations. That is the elevation from the rear, looking up from Sir Ivers Road up towards Commercial Street. You'll notice that there's a 4-story element in the foreground there, and the 5th story you can see is actually the 4th story of the Commercial Street side of the development. Okay, and if you just look at the section there, you can see where the step up in the levels of the building is through the levels on the site. Next slide, please. That's the elevation then, looking from Commercial Street, with the principal entrance there in the darker grey bit in the middle of the building. Again, you've got a cross section looking up from Commercial Street up towards the development. Next slide, please. Those are the floor plans. The lower ground floor at the moment, you'll see a large bin store. I'll come on to that in a minute. And then you've got 2 different apartment types. And again, I'll come on to that in a second, over the floors there. So that's the lower ground floor and lower ground floor and lower ground floor. Then you've got the first and second floors, or the ground floor and first floor, sorry, and then the upper floors then, so floors 2 and 3. So if we move to the next one. And then that's a more detailed plan of the 2 different apartment types within the building, okay? I must confess, I've looked at this plan umpteen times and I'm having difficulty seeing what the difference between the 2 apartments is, but there is a slight difference in the footprint of them. So those are photo montages. So that's taken from the junction of Commercial Street and Bryn Road, looking towards the development. And you can see the materials to be used there, which are brick, a mixture of brick and render. It's a flat roof development, which is in common with lots of the developments you're going to be seeing from across the county borough. If you can move on to the next one, please. And then that's looking up Commercial Street back towards the development. You'll notice, sorry, if you can go back one out, sorry for a second. You'll notice that if you look at the right-hand side of the proposed development there, the building steps down significantly at that elevation, that side there, to cater for the bungalow, which is to the north of the site, to the south of the site. So that is an element where the developers had regard for the context of the site and potential impacts on amenity of that neighbouring property. Sorry, if you can move on again. And you can see that again on that elevation in the far distance there. And again, please. And then that's taken from the rear lane of Sir Ivers Road up towards the site, showing you the rear of the building. Okay, that might be it. Yeah, and so that's the presentation in terms of the elevations of the building. As I say, it's a 36 room apartment building, all of which are to be affordable houses. The proposal has been considered in terms of the impact on amenity, the design of the building, the impacts on privacy of neighbouring properties, and is considered to be acceptable in those regards. Adequate car parking is provided in that rear area there. The building, although large, is not significantly larger than the building that was previously there, surprisingly. And on some of the drawings, it's not quite clear, and you wouldn't be able to see it on the presentation because of the detail. The existing building is actually dotted out in green on there, so you can see the comparison between the two buildings. So it's not considered that the building is overly large or unacceptable in terms of its scale and design. The use is acceptable in a residential area. It's mostly residential along Commercial Street and in St Survivors Road, so the use is considered to be acceptable. The one issue that has arisen for us, and it's conditioned as part of the consent, is that bin store I referred to on the lower ground floor. Our waste strategy team have said that that is not acceptable to them in terms of their protocols for waste strategy moving forward, in terms of certainly recyclable waste, because they want that as a frontage collection. Now, from a placemaking perspective, that could create difficulties for us, because we don't necessarily want bin stores at the front of buildings or bins stored on the highway. But we do feel that in this instance that the storage of recycling bins and food waste bins can be accommodated on the ground floor on the Commercial Street elevation without having a detrimental impact on the appearance of the building or on the design of the building. So therefore we've put a condition on that revised details of that matter can be submitted for further consideration at a later stage. Whilst I refer to the fact that it's proposed that it'll be 100% affordable for all units, because this is in a mid-range viability area where we require 25% as part of our policy, we will look for a Section 106 agreement which secures that 25% affordable provision. Because the policy requires that, we can't justifiably require any 100% affordable on it. However, there would be other mechanisms available to our housing department, to Welsh Government, through grant funding to secure the entirety of the building as affordable units. So on that basis, the proposal is considered to be acceptable and is recommended for approval.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Powell. And we have one speaker tonight, who is the agent, Mr. Ayukani. Can you make your presentation?
Thank you, Chair. Members. I'm Joe Ayukani of Highlight Planning, speaking on behalf of GHR Developments. I'd like to thank the 5 neighbouring residents who submitted comments as part of the application. All matters that have been raised have been carefully considered and are addressed through the application process and in your officer's report. I'd also like to thank the Council's officers for their constructive engagement throughout, which has helped shape the scheme before you, and for all their work in ensuring that the application and supporting material are comprehensive, robust and properly assessed. This application gives you the opportunity to do something genuinely positive with a site that has been vacant, deteriorating and fire damaged for far too long. The former Tredegar Junction Hotel is a prominent brownfield site and in its current condition is an eyesore. The proposal before you would redevelop the site sympathetically to provide much needed affordable homes in a sustainable location. And I do want to be absolutely clear, this is not a HMO. These are modern self-contained apartments. Each one has its own kitchen, bathroom and living facilities. They're designed to be good quality homes, energy efficient, low carbon, with generous windows, strong levels of natural light, and a standard of accommodation that people can be proud to live in. Schemes like this play an important role in the wider housing system. By delivering well-designed, affordable, self-contained homes, they help relieve pressure on poorer quality and substandard housing elsewhere. They provide a better alternative to cramped or unsuitable housing and help meet a very local, real need for this type of facility. What struck me most through the public consultation we held in the rugby club were the people who came to speak to us and asked a very simple question. When will these apartments be built and available to live in? They were local people renting privately, struggling with housing costs, living in accommodation they could not really afford, and in some cases living in homes that were cold, poor quality and damp. That's the real context for this application. Behind every number on the council's housing waiting list and behind every unit on a plan is a person waiting for somewhere secure, decent and affordable to live, and that's why this scheme matters. There's a pressing need for affordable housing of this type, not sometime in the future, but now. These homes would help meet that need on a sustainable brownfield site within settlement limits where the principle of residential redevelopment is already well established through previous consents. As a planning committee, you're often asked to determine difficult applications involving competing considerations. That's the nature of planning. But in this case, the choice is clear. We can leave this site vacant, unsafe and deteriorating, or we can support a policy-compliant redevelopment that removes a long-standing eyesore and delivers much-needed affordable homes for local people. Mr. Powell has referred to the scale of massing being acceptable. It's broadly consistent with the former public house and the earlier permissions for the site. The proposals incorporate solar panels, a green roof, high-quality landscaping and public realm to soften the street scene. In terms of materials, Mr. Powell's presentation mentioned render being proposed, but I just want to make clear that we actually decided against using render on this scheme. It's just contrasting brick materials, one darker, one paler, and that's just to help break up the mass of the building. We're also looking at reusing existing stonework from the pub within the boundary treatments within the site, so that people can appreciate the heritage of the site's historic use. So in conclusion, this is a well-considered proposal that brings together regeneration, affordable housing, biodiversity enhancements and sustainable development. But most importantly, it brings the prospect of a better standard of living for the people who need it most. So for those reasons, I'd respectfully ask members to support your officer's recommendation. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Ayukani. Right, members, are you any questions or queries? Sorry, Mr. Powell.
Sorry, Chair, I can't put my hand up because obviously my machine's not working. But I forgot to mention as well as part of my presentation, we feel the need to impose an additional condition on the consent in terms of the potential for any external extraction equipment on the building, such that details of that should be submitted prior to its installation. That doesn't mean that it will be external extraction, but if there is any, then we would have control over it moving forward. So it would be recommended for approval subject to the additional condition for external extraction equipment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Powell. I've got three indications here for speaking. Councillor Shane Williams, Councillor Nigel Dix, and Councillor Liz Aldworth. So we'll start with you, Councillor Williams.
Thank you very much, Chair. I don't think anyone would, well, I think most people would find it hard to disagree that something has to be done at this site. It's been derelict for such a long time, and the fact that it could provide such well-needed homes, I think it's to be very much commended, and I think that that's what we've got to do. It is slightly concerning when you look at the plans. It does seem, on the face of it, quite significantly larger in size than the existing building. It might not work out to be that when it's built, because I note that it's been said that it's broadly consistent in size, but the plans to me seem to suggest it's considerably larger. And I think that in page 55 of the report, I think it recognises that, because I think the possibility of overbearing is a consideration or a concern. I think that's, and then looking at some of the objections, I think that was one of the concerns, that the size, the scale, the overbearing, and I'm not sure that it does meet that street scene or is in keeping with the street scene. But that's, I suppose, a personal view on the particular design. But as I say, I don't have any objections to this old pub being redeveloped and made much use of.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Williams. I don't think there's any questions to answer there. It's just a comment, and I thank you for that. So it's Councillor Nigel Dix next.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question I got, really. I agree with Councillor Shane Williams on the appearance. It's not particularly, I would call, pleasing to the eye. Aesthetically beautiful building, but there we are. That's what it is. My question is to do with, would they be for rent, or would they be for handed to a housing association, or would they be to purchase flats?
Carwyn?
Discussions on the tenure of the flats would be a matter for consideration by the Housing Department when the Section 106 is secured, basically. So there are a number of different ways, as Councillor Dix is probably aware, of securing affordable housing, whether it's socially rented or whether it's low-cost home ownership or shared ownership of dwellings, all of which fit in with Welsh Government definition of affordable housing. How the tenure is provided moving forward, that's not really a matter for a planning application. It's a matter that should be resolved through the Housing Department moving forward, is when the Section 106 is secured, really, if the application is approved.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Powell.
Okay, thank you, Karen.
Councillor Aldworth, and then Councillor Mike Adams.
Thank you, Chair. Just looking at the building and the horrific fire damage that has occurred, can you advise me about the fire escape arrangement for the building, please? Is it an internal thing, or is there external way out of this new build?
The speaker is not for other members.
Just have a quick look at the plans. It's not entirely clear, but strictly speaking, that's a matter for building regulations in any event. And since Grenfell, obviously, building regulations has been tightened up in terms of fire risk and so on and so forth. I suspect in this instance, it will be an internalised staircase, which would be with fire doors, which have a whatever rating is required now, whether that's an hour or 2 hours rating of fire prevention. But that's a matter that building control would deal with moving forward. It may be on a building of this nature, it needs to have a fire lift in it, such as we've got in this building. But not all buildings need to have those. But certainly it's a matter that our colleagues in building control would deal with moving forward. And buildings of over a certain size as well can only go to local authority building control as well. They cannot be done by approved inspectors, so it would be this authority who would have to deal with the matter.
Right. Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, and finally we have Councillor Mike Adams.
Thank you, Chair, and can I thank Joe for his very good presentation. I did attend the pre-application meeting that he referred to, and he was very, very kind to all of those who attended in saying how well behaved it was. And generally it was. One of the things I like to point out on the objections that we had noted from the people who wrote in, how well they did that compared to some of the other quotes that were coming from some of the people at that meeting. One of the things that we need to make sure is, and I expressed very strongly to all of them, we have a very large number of people in Caerphilly who are looking for housing and are on our housing lists. So I hope I was able to confirm to them that we've got enough of our own people who will be looking and taking advantage of coming to the centre of the borough almost, and taking these up over the next months and years after it's been built. So it's a bit big compared to the extent that it goes to, but it's not really any bigger than the old pub was. But that was a bit square, whereas these are a bit lengthened. So I'm hoping and I'm expecting that once it's built, once we have people going back and forth there, living there, in whichever kind of format they are paying their way, people will get used to it and say, why haven't we got more buildings like that around here to give us something different, so it's not all looking the same, terrace streets? Yeah, I'm happy to propose that we accept the recommendation if no other speakers are coming in after me. So thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, and do we have a seconder if that's proposed? There's no other indication of speakers. Councillor Bissix Foster, are you seconding it? I think I lip read what you were saying then.
Yes.
That's
yes,
okay.
Sorry.
You are okay. I'll go through the recommendations so that it's quite clear. It's been moved and seconded, and the recommendation is that A, the application be deferred to allow the applicants to enter into a Section 106 obligation to provide the following, which is 25% provision of affordable housing. And on completion of the Section 106 obligation, that B, planning permission be granted, subject to the conditions in the officer's report. And if the obligation is not completed within 3 months of the resolution to approve, that the planning services manager be granted delegated powers to refuse the application for failure to comply with policy CW11 of the Caerphilly County Borough Local Development Plan up to 2021, adopted in November 2010. So that's the recommendation. And there's one additional condition, and that's been made clear by the officer. So that's what we're moving and seconded, and that's what we're voting on. Okay, so can we have the voting slip, please? Please vote for, against, or abstain, and press the submit button.
The vote's been cast, Chair, and the officer's recommendation is being carried.
And it's unanimous, is it?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, and thank you for speaking tonight, Mr. Ayakani. We'll see you another time, I'm sure. Right. The next agenda item is agenda item 5, and it's application number 25/0840 NCC, and it's land at grid reference 310441193 Graig Even Leishan, Common Road, Lamfaben, and the case officer is Anthony Pine. Anthony, can you make a presentation, please?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. I'll just share the presentation, which has just come up. This application seeks to vary conditions to an earlier permission to erect a synchronous condenser with the full development description on that slide there and in the committee report. Members may recall that the earlier application was approved at the December 2023 Planning Committee, having first held a committee site visit. I'll go through with members showing plans and photographs to explain the site and the main changes sought from the previously approved scheme. Just to refresh memories, this aerial photograph shows the Llanfaban area. This is the existing Kilfynydd substation, which is a significantly sized substation. The application site is broadly to the east of that. This is a slightly zoomed in view with the application site, as I said, to the east. The nearest residential properties are over 100 metres away from the site, and there's a listed church, St Mabon's Church, and a miners' memorial that's also listed in the cemetery that's across the road from the church. This is the approved layout, previously approved by members at that committee I referenced. This showed a large building which would encompass the synchronous condenser, along with quite a lot of external plant. The changes are mainly to the plant and as a result of sort of detailed design. There is also some plant now proposed to be enclosed with an additional sort of lean-to element, which will become clear as I go through the plans. This is the main amendments as set out by the applicant in their covering sort of planning statement. The DNO, which I believe is Distribution Network Operator Transformer, is being relocated in the site. There are some changes to boundary treatments, surface finishes, the number of parking spaces within the site. There's a slight reduction from 5 to 3. However, the transport engineering manager's satisfied that still is sufficient for maintenance for any of the equipment and visits by the operator, and some landscaping changes. There are some amendments to coolers with the make and models revised, repositioning of expansion vessels. There is an acoustic barrier which is being increased in height by a metre from 3.5 metres to 4.5 metres. Just to say, with the changes, the applicant has submitted an updated noise assessment, which still shows that the noise generated is predicted to be acceptable on all surrounding sensitive receptors, and there is proposed conditions would be reimposed, which include a requirement for noise verification to show that the development would operate in accordance with the noise levels predicted, and that verification information has to be submitted prior to the development being brought into beneficial use. So there's significant safeguards in terms of noise retained. The main transformers, this is the element that I said they're going to be enclosed. They've now been grouped in pairs, and just on that right-hand side, previously they were fully external. They're now going to be enclosed in a lean-to, or a pair of lean-to extensions to the building, and also a firewall is increasing in height, as detailed there, 2 metres extra in height, though the building, I think at its ridge is something in the region of 13 metres, so the overall massing is still considered acceptable. Again, these are the auxiliary transformers. Apologies, the previous ones were the enclosed in this firewall that I mentioned. There's a lot of transformers involved in this. It's the auxiliary transformers that are enclosed and reconfigured in those pair, which is in that lean-to element that you can see there in isolation, but on the next slides you'll be able to see it in the context of the main building. So this is an elevation comparison of the building. We've also got some full site comparison elevations which show some of the additional external plant. The top figure is the approved. This is the northern sort of side elevation. I think it was the previous firewall now being replaced with the lean-to structure. So there's no there's no increase in overall height of the building. The footprint floor space does go up because it's now being enclosed rather than external plant, but that's considered acceptable as well. This is the front elevation where there's some amendments to openings, roller shutter doors becoming bigger, and some additional louvers and sort of amendments to louvers and pedestrian access doorway, but no sort of substantial change to the form of the building. This is the other side elevation, again with alterations to sort of louvers and some of the external plant. This is the rear elevation. It's somewhat difficult to see. So on the lower proposed elevation now, you can see the lean-to elements, which I'm just highlighting there. So they would enclose those auxiliary transformers that I mentioned before. These are the site elevations, so the building towards the left-hand side. You can see that those lean-to elements I mentioned are immediately adjoining the rear of the building. Now there is the slight increase in massing of the firewalls, but the broad sort of arrangement of the plant is still deemed to be acceptable. It's quite a well-divorced site and contained site. Certainly, once trees are back in leaf, there's significant screening, and as previously detailed, there's going to be substantial tree screening with a high proportion of mature trees being planted at the front of the site, where it would be most visible. This is the front of the building. There are some expansion tanks that appear on the left-hand side in a slightly more elevated position than previously, but the overall impact is still deemed to be acceptable. This is the other side, the southern side elevation, pretty much the same as you've seen from the reverse slide. And a further elevation there. And that is just a photograph of the sort of superstructure of the building, which is under construction at the moment. In terms of impacts, the principle of the application was established through the earlier permission, having regard to Section 73 applications. They're not considered to be any material changes in circumstances or planning policy, and the specific alterations and amendments proposed by this application are considered to have an acceptable impact in terms of their visual impact, noting that the site is within a special landscape area, but is within the context of, within the vicinity of the existing substation and several pylon lines. The impact on heritage assets is considered to remain acceptable. And as I've mentioned before, in terms of noise, the updated noise assessment's been considered by the Environmental Health Officer, who's raised no objections, and we have the safeguard of the verification condition requiring the developer to demonstrate that it can operate at the levels that have previously been assessed. The application was advertised via press notice, site notices and neighbour notification letters. Representations have been received from 4 persons, and those are detailed in the committee report. But, Chair, the application is recommended for approval as the principle of the development remains acceptable with no material changes in policy since the original application, and with the conditions imposed, it's considered will have an acceptable impact on the amenity of surrounding residential properties and the character of the area.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pine. There are no external speakers on this item, so members, do you have any questions or concerns about this application? If so, please indicate. None? Councillor Mansfield Power.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Only a quick one. Page 38, looking at the comments from the public. The last but one, they've got 3 sites development neglected for impact, the character of the area, and not screened as promised was the one that stuck out. And then the response would be tree planting required post-construction as shown in the original submission. Have they missed something from the original submission there, Carwyn, or is that a condition moving forward, or just something within this application? It seems to imply that something hasn't been done from an earlier application.
The tree planting is required to be sort of carried out. It's usually the first planting season, sort of following completion. There was significant discussion and I believe the landscape architect's response to this application was that he considered the changes and deemed them sufficient. We have previously discharged a condition on landscaping, I believe, and it is required for them to carry out the same planting scheme, which included a percentage of mature trees. So there's no change, there's no sort of dilution to the landscaping required. They are going to be carrying out significant planting, but that will occur. Condition 7 carried out in the first planting season following the sort of occupation of the building or being brought into use or the completion of the development. And then there's a requirement for any trees or plants within a period of 5 years from the completion to, if they die, that they need to be replanted. So there will be substantial tree screening going in. That will occur at a later date.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Pine. Are you happy with that response, Councillor Powell?
Yes, great, thank you. Thank you.
There is no further indication from members or queries, so the recommendation that permission be granted subject to the conditions contained in the officer's report. That's the recommendation. Will somebody move that?
I move that, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Williams, and it's been seconded by Councillor Angel. Thank you, Councillor Angel. So can we have the voting slip then, please?
The vote's been cast, Chair, and the officer's recommendation has been carried unanimously.
Okay, thank you for that, Vicky. And that concludes tonight's meeting, members. I'd like to thank you everyone for attending, and I declare this meeting closed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Happy birthday, Liz.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.